7 o'clock in Southern California, which means it's time for the Thursday night D-Star Roundtable for May 11th, 2017. This is Mike, N6HKH, your net control. And I want to thank Bob, W6KD, for taking over as net control last week due to my back injury. And I did get some thoughtful emails. I appreciate them. I'm doing better. It's still pretty sore, but certainly not like it was last Thursday. And being a long-time back sufferer, I can tell you that it's going to get better. Just take some time, but certainly good enough to get this net going and keep it going for as long as necessary. Although, I don't know, a 5-hour roundtable does not sound too appetizing tonight, but we'll see where things go. So, as you know, we're here every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific, which is at present 0200 UTC, on XRF 002 Alpha and a constellation of X reflectors, including XRF 310A, XRF 555 Alpha, and our multi-protocol reflector XLX 212A. This is a technical net dedicated to D-Star and open digital systems and is a group effort. That means that we look for stations to participate. So to join the discussion, start a topic, or ask a question, please key up when I call for stations. Remember, though, to not quick key or tailgate. That doesn't work well in any digital mode. I will pause regularly to let you key up, and I ask that participating stations do the same. We don't take formal check-ins or do a roll call to give us more time to talk D-Star. Now, Net Control is online at roundatable.tech. That's roundatable, all one word, .tech. Just simply type that into the address field of your favorite browser, and it will take you to the homepage of the Roundtable Forum Board, where you can find all you need to know about connecting to or listening later to podcasts, to Broadcastify, and other ways to participate in the Roundtable live or later on. Now, there you'll find the forum's real-time chat feature. It's called the Shout Box, but it's simply a quick chat feature that is extensively used during the roundtable. You can use that to contact me as well as to post information relevant to the topic at hand, such as links and quick notes. We ask that stations offering a web address in conjunction with their presentation to post that URL or DNS in the shout box so that those listening now or later can link to that website or document location. Again, the URL for the forum board, which we'll be looking at throughout this roundtable, is roundtable, all one word, .tech, T-E-C-H. At the close of the roundtable, tonight's shout box is moved to the shout box history above the general roundtable discussion board. Podcast listeners, however, get the shout box downloaded automatically. First up on the roundtable is 60 seconds of D-Star Basics. And tonight on 60 seconds of D-Star Basics, we're going to talk about when all else fails. That is, when you're having trouble getting your access point, or as we call it, a hotspot, although there's technically a difference too, to connect or work. And I'm using tonight an example of a Shoutbox post, KM6JEE, over the last two roundtables, posted questions and got a lot of answers on a question that faces many new to D-Star, especially those that are new to a hotspot, and that is that they're just unable to get it to work. They can't seem to either get a signal out or receive a signal. Now, if you were to take a look at the Shoutbox postings from last Thursday, you'll see suggestions for corrections, and that station, KM6JEE, who detailed his work on this, went through all of them, but was still having what he described as choppy audio. And at the end of it all, he found out that it was his radio settings that were the problem, not programming, but its DV or digital settings. Now, while anyone with a problem on a hotspot should go through the various checklists, and if you listen to the roundtable, especially during 60 seconds of D-Star Basics, you look at the shout box, you just listen to the conversations that we have about hotspot problems, there's a lot of things that could go wrong that you should take a look at. Certainly, if you can't connect to a reflector, you should try to connect to a different reflector. And if you can't hear things, then if you have another hotspot, see if you can hear there. You want to make sure that the source that you're using, that is the reflector you're connecting to or trying to connect to, is not the problem. But this is a common situation facing many. It's that they've taken the default settings, that is the digital settings in their radio, from default. So one of the things to consider, and perhaps maybe one of the things out the gate, is to return all of your radio settings to default, depending upon the radio. And of course, we're talking about ICOM and then, of course, the Kenwood D-Star radio. There is usually a way to, not by resetting the entirety of the radio or affecting the programming, because we're not talking about programming, but setting all of the DV or digital settings back to default. If not, you can run through each of them, and if you're, on some of the radios, it'll show you, for example, on the Society 31 that I'm looking at now, it actually shows you on each of these settings, the digital mode settings, and that was my fault for not looking at the screen. Of course, I was trying to read this as well, but looking at the radio. But, the radio itself hopefully will have an indication of what's default and what isn't. And if not, the owner's manual for your radio certainly will go through all the different digital mode settings, separate, of course, from non-digital mode settings, and let you know what's default. So get them all back to default. In the case here with KM6JEE, he had a couple of settings, and he had this one specific setting, the radio's weather alert, which is a popular function, but it by default is off. So he had that on, and that is essentially, as he concluded, interfered with his ability to avoid the choppy audio, to listen to clean audio as we would expect to have on D-Star and the digital modes. Now, once you get your hotspot or access point working, you can change the D-Star settings that you'd like to have from default to what you want them to be, but do so one by one. And as you move from default to a custom or a other than default setting, test the device. Key up your hotspot, see that it can link to a reflector. Maybe you can listen to yourself through another radio or in another hotspot or in whatever manner. Assure yourself that your device is working properly, and then move to the next digital setting in your radio that you'd like to check. The point being of tonight's 60 seconds of D-Star Basics is that it's not always programming. It's not always the things that we go through to make sure that that we're not doing other bad things or wrong things. But many times, it's just that you moved a default setting off of default because that's what you want that particular thing to be or to operate. Put them back on default. You can always change them later. And that's 60 seconds or thereabouts of D-Star Basics. So, continuing on, and I hope everybody noticed that we're getting into the meat of the roundtable. We cut the run-up way back so that we could get to things quicker. And for those of you who normally might, start listening actively 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so after the beginning, because there was quite a script that I read, and for good reason. I won't get into why we went through it all, but there is a reason for that. We get new listeners all the time. We cut that way back, so some may be surprised to find that we're already into the meat of things. So I usually at this point will take a look at the shout box to see if there's any posts of note, and nothing that can't be looked at your leisure, nothing that we need to talk about. The current discussions folder, which is where we put things we want to keep that are of a continuing or thread-like basis. Nothing new since apparently I posted there, so we'll pass on that. The general discussions folder is always worth reviewing, but we haven't had anything there since, well, we had actually a post updated by John K6KD, and you can take a look at that at your leisure. And you know, the general discussions board and the references and links, actually it's a folder within the general board. They're, you know, well worth checking out, especially if you are having problems or you want to learn where to go. It's a good reference source to take you out, you know, elsewhere. And, you know, for those new to D-Star or anything else we talk about here on the Thursday Night D-Star Roundtable, it's a great place to go to learn a little bit, if not a lot, about the topic, and it gives you places to go to learn more. So I thought we'd just point that out. And, of course, while you're perusing, now, of course, I'm running along, getting back to a lengthy run-up, but you might want to, if you're not subscribed to the Thursday Night D-Star Roundtable flyer and newsletter, you know, you might think about clicking on that and subscribing, because we send out a weekly flyer, sometimes Wednesdays, but mostly Thursdays, to let you know what we're going to talk about, and as a reminder that we're going to be on the air on Thursdays. And we have a newsletter that I'm already excited about it, that we're going to be putting together and sending out occasionally. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing and about D-Star and some of the new trends within the open system digital modes, well, get on the mailing list. Just, nothing bad is going to happen. So now I'm going to call 4 stations who have follow-ups to last week's discussions. This could be corrections, updates, things that didn't come to mind last week, things that occurred during the week that were not available to you last week. We had quite a discussion on trying to get the G3 repeater systems to connect to REF reflectors. It looks like that may have been resolved, but I'm not entirely sure. So if you have a follow-up or comment to our discussions from last week, let's take you now. Please key up.
K6JM.
And we welcome Jim, K6JM. Thanks for being with us. Go ahead.
Okay. Off to a great start. I like the streamlined start, Mike. Couple of small items. One is that just finished building up a little access point. Some people would call it a hotspot, but it's low power. It's using the DV Mega board and an Arduino Uno and a Pi 3. And it's running the multi-mode firmware on the Arduino and the G4KLX multi-mode program called MMDVM host. And I'm just starting to play with it. I have D-Star working, and I'm working on DMR. But I always do D-Star first because that's my favorite mode. So that's one thing, and it looks like I'll be able to take it with me to Dayton, and with a little extra battery pack, I'll be able to be completely have my access point, multi-mode access point, completely portable. Of course, use it with my phone for internet. The other thing is kind of like an announcement in the sense that I just received another similar approach, which is sold by the MMDVM people in Canada, plus given. And it's a little kit. It's called the Zoom Spot. Let me take a break. And you can get that the board itself was designed, and some of the firmware programming I think was done by KI6ZUM Jim. And of course, he's been working on this sort of thing for several years, and he's put a lot of time and effort into this, and it's really coming to fruition. This board is a DSP modem, if you want to classify it that way. That is, it doesn't have a JMSK modem chip for D-Star on it. It does everything in firmware. But on board, it also has the what would be the equivalent of an Arduino microprocessor. So it's complete. And then on it, it also has a 7021 RF chip. So it's like a multi-mode DVAP. In fact, the category, I'm trying to invent a term for this category of product, and in my thinking, it's MM DVAP. I don't think it infringes on Internet Labs. It's a multi-mode digital voice access point. So anyway, it's a little kit. It's almost through whole. It reminds me. Let me just take one more break. Reminds me of how kits used to be easy before Surface Mount came along. Well, this does have some Surface Mount. Bruce Given's company has done that work on his equipment, and so there's no Surface Mount soldering. It's all through hole, and not much, to be honest. So I'm looking forward to getting that on the air also. Hope to get to it before I leave to Dayton, but I don't know. Anyway, it looks real good so far, high quality stuff, and I've been following the development cycle here for the last several months, and this is a big deal. Really, really powerful and pretty simple at the same time. So if you're into multi-mode, that's another way. I like DV Mega, but this looks good too. Back to you, Mike. This is K6GM.
Wow, it sounds like the Project Bench has got all kinds of goodies on it that you're going to be able to play with. I was intrigued by your new mobile access point that is the DV Mega and the Arduino Uno combination. Can you take a few moments, if you have, to just describe that? I don't think that there's been a rundown of that particular kind of access point, and since you put it together, and from what I can understand, it does everything A to Z without any drawbacks. But perhaps I should hear it from you, since you put it together. Can you maybe give it just a little bit closer scrutiny? That is for the roundtable tonight. K6GM, go ahead.
Okay, the Koos van Doorn in Netherlands, when he created the DV Mega dual band radio, he created two versions, and one of them plugs directly into a Pi, and that's probably the one I would recommend people buy because it makes things a little simpler. But I had started out with the other version, which is it has a USB connector to plug into the Pi, and it allows me to test on Windows as well as on the Pi. But to be real honest, in normal usage, I'm always going to use it with a Pi or something equivalent, small external computer. But it's got an RF chip on it, and in this particular one I bought, he sells them single band, but I bought the dual band. And it's got to have firmware, and the firmware runs on a chip that is found on the Arduino microprocessor boards. So his initial firmware did only D-Star. And that's what I got it for, and I used it on D-Star, and it's really nice. But he has written a second set of firmware that does multi-mode. Let me take a break. So I just did what I did for this project was I wiped out the D-Star firmware and loaded in the multi-mode firmware, and then plugged it into the Pi. Now the Pi has to have some sort of system on it, so I think in D-Star world, I may show preferences, but I think it's arguably the W6KD D-Star Commander image is certainly one of the most popular. That may be the most popular, and I think it's probably for most people it's the best choice. But what do you do when you want to do multi-mode? We use some different programs, and so I found the KP5 RAB image to be perfect for this, and that's the one I'm using. He did a really nice job for multi-mode type people, and it didn't take me very long at all. It took me, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes to get it working on D-Star, but I do have some experience there. Anyway, let me one more break. Anyway, the Arduino with the multi-mode firmware has a little tiny short USB cable plugging into the Pi. I strapped them all together. That doesn't take up much space. I am running it off a wallboard 5, USB power supply clamp. But my plan is I have some batteries that are supposedly for charging USB devices, but they actually provide quite a bit of hours of actual usage in the field. So that's when I'm mobile, totally mobile. That's how I'm going to use it with my phone. So it's basically RF and hotspot, and it's basically multi-mode data. Back to you. This is K6JM.
ZL2RO recognized. Well, that's pretty cool, Jim. I'm not sure that everyone understands or knows that there are several models of the DV Mega, and this particular one, with the USB, is a DV Mega Arduino Shield dual band radio, which uses the Raspberry Pi 3 ultimately, and you use the USB instead of the GPIO header to plug in the Raspberry Pi, and just haven't had a lot of people talk about it, and I'm glad you put it together and got it working. So let me just pause for a moment and see if anyone has any questions of K6JM about this version of the DV Mega, the dual one with the Arduino Uno. I mean, it's not uncommon, but he's got it up and running. Anyone have any questions about this that you'd like to pick on K6JM before we move on? If you do, please key up now. Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 key ups from K6KD. I guess that's enough to get you in. K6KD, go ahead.
N6H-K-8.
All right, nothing heard. All right, Jim, appreciate that, and thanks for jumping in there and talking about what you have going. So, are we going to hear you in Dayton? Hopefully, maybe you get a report on what you see, anything new from there, and then we'll let you off the hook for tonight. K6JM, go ahead.
Well, I'll be there, and I'll be taking notes and photos, but I will try to get into the net. But I can't always promise just because of the issues of travel and stuff. So I'll do my best next Thursday, but it could be that the following one is where I'll have some things to talk about. and I'll send you some emails, Mike, and you can decide how you want to post that or not. But at any rate, yeah, thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to it. Back to you, T6JM.
Well, you know, I bug everybody to key up from wherever they may be, Dayton or otherwise, but I understand you. I'd almost rather have a report after you get back here on the round table, and feel free to send photos. I mean, I'll post them in the soon-to-be established photos gallery for the Thursday Night D-Star Roundtable Forum Board. Anyway, thanks, Jim. ZL2RO, I know you keyed up back a bit, and welcome, ZL2RO. Go ahead.
Yeah, ZL2RO, thank you, Mike, and good afternoon to everybody else that's on this net. One quick note, I run that very combination that Jim was talking about and have for a very long time, the Arduino and the drill board DB Mega in the Netherlands on a Pi, and I have not done the firmware upgrade for the multi-mode, but I think that might be on the cards now that I know that it can be done. But it is a very compact little unit and works absolutely fantastic. But I do have a more serious question, and I hope I don't ruffle any feathers. The G3 and terminal mode and access point. That's a bit of a headache. I'm beginning to understand. And do you think there's going to be a way through it in the interim, or is it going to be quite a drawn out sort of saga? Mike, over.
So I'm not quite sure I follow you, about your question concerning G3, the terminal mode and access point. So to help get your response, specifically, what is troubling or what are you thinking about? ZL2RO, go ahead.
Oh, the fact that we can't seem to use it. I mean, okay, you've got to be G3 registered, but then you've got to somehow get off the G2 registration, and I don't fully understand all that. I can't go register my course on a G3 gateway because I'm already registered on a G2 gateway, if that makes any sense, Mike.
Well, I think that's what you're supposed to do is if you have the two new ICOM radios, and assuming you want to put the terminal motor access point to work and to utilize the features of G3, you have to register with that G3 gateway separate from the registration that you probably have had for quite a while with the G2 gateway, all of which, of course, tie into the U.S. Trust. So let me see if I've got that right and get some comments from those that know far more about it than me. Let's help out Phil. Stations, please key up.
KE0A.
KE0AYJ, thanks for helping us out. Go ahead.
Six HKH in the group, KE0AYJ. Yeah, you're basically right, Mike. It's a separate registration altogether. You don't put the other information in. You just let it know at the bottom, usually at the page when they build it for the registration, that you need access point or the further +2 features, and you'll see it down there at the bottom. It only allows you access through the gateway to the repeater that's gateway is running. That's basically you get into the repeater either as an access point directly to the repeater or as a terminal mode off that repeater. And that's it, multiple times. So pick carefully, and that's where you'll go. It doesn't affect the gateway. that was the information I got of the Texas group on it. And if it got refined further than that, like I hope it would, but hasn't, that would be nice. But well, we'll see what the future brings and what magic they have at the D-Star Forum over there in Hamvention, which I will be at. So hopefully that helps. KE0AYJ, back to the net.
All right, thanks for that. Now, can you use, let's say you've registered as you described with the G3 system, can you continue to use the two new ICOM radios, the ID4100 and the ID51A plus 2 on a G2 system? Let's say that you trip on another repeater or you're traveling. Is there any impediment once you've registered on a G3 to work a G2? And also another question, I'm hoping to get some answers to sort this out. It's been a while since we talked about this. Once you register on a G3 gateway with your new radios, is that good for all G3 gateways, or do you have to register with each one independently? Stations who can help us out, please key up.
KE0AY.
All right, Andy, appreciate it. KE0AYJ, go ahead.
Okay, once you register as a G3 for the access point terminal mode features, it migrates throughout the networks as using that, and you're accepted as that, so they know automatically that you're in terminal mode or access point mode, and it only allows you to get into the repeater for whichever gateway you're going to. It doesn't negate G2 or anything, so you can still use the features of XRF and going through the reflexors and all the good stuff that's still out there. It's everything what you've got now, plus call sign routing, which we don't like, basically. So that's it in a nutshell, Mike. I haven't seen any reason to take IRC down or anything like that, or to go to G3. Had this discussion months and months ago, and still somewhat irritated about it, but that's the way it is until further development comes along and somebody sees things our way and the way we need it over here. So KE0AYJ, back to the net.
All right, appreciate it. K6JM, go ahead.
Just wanted to add one more thing. As I've said before, the local repeater here in Northern California that I administer, W6CX, we converted to G3, although we did it in an unusual way, and I won't go into that right now. But the point is that for a G3 registration page, you can set up regular terminals. A lot of people set up a one with the initial field of having a blank in it, and then maybe a B and a C. Well, the point is you can set up a new terminal, and on that new terminal, let's say it's a D or whatever, you click the box that says that you want to use access point functionality. So your other terminals will be the same and use them normally, but that one is the one you'd use for the 51 A plus 2 or the 4100. Back to you, K6JM.
All right, Jim, thank you. Is there anyone out there that, after having, assuming that you have the ID4100 or the ID51A plus 2, have tested out the terminal mode and access points, which I suppose you would like to do, given the investment in those radios. But has anyone actually found them to be satisfactory? That is, that they continue to put them to use, notwithstanding the fact that they seem not to be even close to the current state of affairs with respect to access points and what we use here, for example, to connect to the round table. So, is there, just out of curiosity, it seems most people would give them a try and say, never mind, I'll just, use my D-Star radio as any other D-Star radio. It's just newer, and you got Bluetooth, a couple new features, but I haven't heard of anybody that puts either the terminal mode or the access point to continuous use because they, well, let me just see if anybody is. Stations, please, Kia. All right, no response. I just don't know of anybody that has found that to be superior to anything, frankly. But that's just the view that I have and others have expressed here. So, with that in mind, ZL2RO, what do you think? And anything further? Go ahead.
Yeah, ZL2RO. No, thank you for that information. That's sort of made things a little easier to understand. If I'm understanding what was said about just registering as a different terminal and ticking that box and things like that, it sounds fairly straightforward. So I'll give this some serious consideration. And thank you very much, Mike, for letting me in. And I just have to go and do a few errands. It's just coming up 20 to 3 here on a Friday afternoon, and it's raining. So I've just got to go do a couple of things. But I thought I'd jump into this net and have a good listen. And I had some questions, so I thought I'd ask. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. So back to Net Control. ZL2RO.
All right, thanks for joining us for as long as you could, and appreciate the question. So let me just make sure that we've exhausted follow-up to last week's topics. There were some things that may not have been fully completed, and you may wish to add to that. So let's just check again. The stations, please. Yep. All right, nothing seen or heard. I should note that in response to ZL2RO's question, that there's a couple posts on the shout box prior to the start of tonight's net that discuss that, and there's also, I believe, are some posts generally about the new radios, none of which are favorable, but nevertheless, you can take a look at them on the Thursday night D-Star Roundtable forum board by putting roundtable, all one word, .tech, T-E-C-H, in the address field of your favorite browser and take a look. Alrighty, well, weather changes. We're getting into hurricane season. We're hearing about rain. In fact, we don't, this is not even remotely a weather net. But in fact, I think Phil posted something warning us not to talk about the weather because he would come through the hotspot and then out through the speaker here and choke me out because it's been raining incessantly, flooding out his area. But still, it's not too often that a station experiences a lightning strike. Things that you can expect. I mean, I heard the story and I jumped on W6KD and said, hey, you got to talk about this because there's a little bit more to it than simply putting surge protectors and, grounding devices in your station. There's a lot more to it, especially in light of how we conduct ourselves here in the digital world in amateur radio. There's routers, there's hotspots, all kinds of contraptions that you have going, and protection is essential. So I'm going to call on W6KD to tell us all about his event. In fact, if I could play music and maybe Luke Christie's Lightning Strike, I do so, but that would be rude, and also I wouldn't think to do it anyway. But W6KD, if you're ready to go ahead.
Hey, good evening, Mike and Annette. Let's see, am I getting through? Yeah, okay. I live here in Colorado Springs, about 7,000 feet elevation, on the northeast side of town, kind of heading out into the plains, and really Tornado Alley kind of starts maybe 10, 15 miles east of me here, from not very far outside Colorado Springs, all the way through Kansas to eastern Missouri. It's pretty much the same cornfield, and it is a place where we get a lot of convective weather, big thunderstorms, lightning, hail, tornadoes. Thankfully, not too much of that here in town, but also interestingly, to sort of set the discussion up, my house is relatively new, 10 years old, in a relatively new subdivision that has no above ground utilities at all. All of the cable TV, telephone, and power is all buried, with the only above ground components being the actual interface boxes that transformers that are mounted on concrete pads at some of the street corners for the electricity, and then access boxes along the street and change hands. Anyway, this week we had a series of thunderstorms move through, and by the way, I have no exterior antennas at the QTH. Well, I actually have one dual band antenna that's mounted with a mag mount base on a barbecue grill in a covered patio. That's the only outdoor antenna I have day to day. Everything else is hotspots inside the house and mostly in the basement. And we had a lightning strike. I don't think it hit the house, but it came darn close. Got a blinding flash and a simultaneous boom. And at the same time, several of the smoke detectors in the upstairs screeched for about a second or so. And all of a sudden, every UPS in the house, and I've got about 8 of them here, spread around the house for computer and radio equipment and some music stuff. They were all beeping, and most of them reset themselves, but not all. 2 of the GFI circuits in the house tripped. One of the surge protectors that protects some fairly expensive music and sound equipment, the Varactor inside the Varactor surge protector inside the surge protector strip blew apart like a firecracker. I mean, it actually exploded. It gave itself up, but none of the components that were on that surge protector were hurt. Well, none of them were actually on either at the time, but they were plugged in, and the power strip was on. And then to make matters worse, it scrambled the CMOS or EEPROM or whatever in my router. My router stopped talking to a bunch of equipment in the house, not all of it, but some of it. And that was compounded by what troubleshooting later revealed to be a blown port on one of the fairly high quality internet switches that was connected to the stuff on my desktop down here in the shack. So enough EMF got in the house from that lightning strike, and interestingly into the basement of all places, to actually pop a port on an internet switch. It actually I had to actually reset to default the router and reprogram everything, because it was basically scrambled enough to where I couldn't get it back. I couldn't reset. So anyway, the moral of the story, several of them. First of all, is that if you think that surge protectors don't matter and UPSs don't matter, I would beg to differ, especially if you live in a place that's prone to get lightning. I have no doubt in my mind that my electronic drum set and my and a very high-end stereo and my 7100 and a couple other components that were connected to that blown surge protector probably wouldn't be around and working if I didn't have them plugged in there. I have no way of knowing what might have happened to some of the other devices because I make liberal use of UPSs around the house, and those all did their job. They tripped and then came back on, and the only one that did not come back on was actually on one of the GFI circuits that had tripped. So it induced enough asymmetric current in the house wiring to cause the ground fault interrupter to detect a fault and trip in two different circuits. Interestingly, not in a place where you would expect it at all. Again, down in the basement where you would think that the stuff up higher would be more likely to get hit. So yeah, paying attention to that stuff is important if you value your gear, and also some attention to surges that can come in on cable lines, on telephone lines, as well as your power lines is also probably important as well. And so here I've been very smug in my confidence that because I didn't have any outdoor antennas, I was in pretty good shape, and it didn't cause a lot of issues, but I'm fairly convinced that if I hadn't made liberal use of surge protectors and UPSs around the house, it would have been much worse. So, word to the wise anyway. Back to the net, W6 Kitty.
Quite a story. So, was there anything that you want to do differently, or any equipment swaps that you found necessary to make the damage? I use that word lightly because you described damage, but it wasn't like everything just caught on fire as a result of this near miss of sorts. It seems to be mostly EMF inductance than anything else. W6KD, go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of constantly reevaluating it, and I'm looking at but it's this last event. It appears that the actual EMF that got induced in the lines occurred in the house. It does not look like any of it came in from outside. The cable modem is fine. The router, however, which I've had issues with before, but it like I said, it got scrambled. The programming got scrambled, and but not so bad that I couldn't reset it and reprogram. And none of the stuff, nothing came in apparently on the power lines. There's no common, it's not. Well, I've had a lightning strike that actually took out a bunch of stuff in the house a long, long time ago, and you could kind of trace the circuit. You could see fairly clearly where it came in, and all the stuff on a single circuit was pretty much hosed. I lost a VCR and a TV and the smart thermostat and a bunch of other stuff in the house. This is in Texas back in the 80s, and but yeah, this wasn't like that. It appears that the actual surge current was induced in the wiring in the house, probably. And in fact, I haven't gone out and looked yet because we haven't had suitable weather, but I am going to go up on the roof and take a look and see if there's burn marks or anything, because it would not shock me if I find that the lightning actually did hit my house. So, but anyway, yeah, it's you don't have to have a big tower and a beam up there, grabbing the lightning to get yourself in trouble. Back to the net, W6 Kitty.
And I like your pun. Well, let's see if there are stations who have lightning stories they'd like to tell. I would hope that there would be also not just simply, bad things happen. If you were in the shower and lightning hit and you had to go to the hospital, I guess, if you want to tell that story, that's fine. But more importantly is, if you have a story, what did you change? That is, what thinking did that lightning strike change from what we think we know to what you now know as a result of your experience and what we should all plan on for those of us who have, the greater potential of lightning. So we'll take some stories if you care to tee up and give us some. I'm sure there are plenty, but, let's find out. Stations, please key up.
KE0AYJ.
KE0AYJ, go ahead.
N6SKH and group KE0AYJ. Yeah, what Bob is describing almost perfectly is the electromagnetic pulse. And the first indication of that was, in fact, he said his smoke detectors and fire detectors went off. And usually they're so isolated and so protected because of the kind of devices they are. It's indicative of electromagnetic pulse, which can happen with just heat lightning, or sky-to-sky lightning, cloud-to-cloud, if you want to call it that, and earth-to-sky lightning. That's where that usually happens. And that's indicative of that. And yes, it's fully capable of taking out a bunch of things. I'm working with Rockwell and Lockheed, going around teaching classes at Buckley and down there in the Springs also, and up at Warren on ELINT and radar phenomena. We found that playing with those type of things brought up a different can of worms, and we started experimenting with that and different types of things to protect equipment. Ground is the best, but sometimes you're not always near your house or your QTH or your shack to ground everything in the world. And there's absolutely nothing you're going to do with EMP. It's going to get you, and you sacrifice the antenna if it is a strike. You sacrifice the coax and maybe a little bit of the tower, and hopefully that's all you do. I lived up by the Greeley area, and I'm sure Bob knows where that's at. And went out with this guy, warned people out onto the eastern plains to Kersey and even further out, and watched the funnel clouds and watched the tornadoes hit the ground and saw the lightning strikes. And I was up by the water tower in LaSalle, Colorado, about 20 feet away from it when lightning hit that. And it took out my radios in the Jeep I had at the time. Luckily, I had some spares, and everything worked from that point on. But yeah, that's EMP, Bob, and welcome to the club, KE0AYJ.
All right, Andy, thanks for that. So, Bob brings up an important point, and we're looking at this from surge protection, putting in, UPSs that have, surge protection in it, and assuming that we, avoid the cheap ones and get ones that are going to do the job. Because they are supposed to trip, and ultimately, as Bob mentioned, if they do burn up or launch themselves off the floor, they've done their job. It would be nice if you could just simply reset them. But interestingly, even though they protected the gear, some of the programming still got scrambled, even though they were sitting behind, as I understand it, some sort of surge protection. But Bob mentioned the cable lines and the telco lines, and for that matter, even the satellite lines. I'm not familiar with any way to put devices in line to keep them from being either the conductor or what inducts the lightning, and that is the EMF. Because at most you might see, if it's above ground, well, below ground too, I guess, but you see a ground line. The satellite cable has, the ground wire, and the guys installing it screw it to a plate or a block, and then they tie it to whatever they think is the nearest best ground. I haven't seen anybody actually drive a stake in the ground. Maybe they do that in some parts of the country. Same thing with telephone and the cable, and that to me is more worrisome, especially in older areas where this is all on poles. Everything's above ground. And I don't see any way of protecting of course, I could care less about the company's modem. I mean, if that's their problem, I think. But there's a lot of stuff I have plugged into these devices that are terminated in the back to the lines, that is the coax that's providing the service. Is there a way of putting some sort of surge protection or device in line? Because satellites, I can't imagine what it would be. I mean, that would interrupt the signal. The signal's so weak as it is. But anyone have any ideas? Please key up.
W6.
W6KD, go ahead.
Yeah, for internet in particular, you can isolate the cable running into your house from outside from the rest of your network by using something like a Wi-Fi bridge. You essentially bring the cable TV, the CATV cable comes in, it connects to the modem, and then to your router perhaps, and then you can actually use a Wi-Fi bridge to establish essentially an air gap between the cable connected piece of the network and the rest of the network. Depends on where you're at, because it does induce all the issues of Wi-Fi overcrowding, et cetera, can become an issue. If you're in a area where you're kind of spread out, you don't have a lot of high density of housing and other users, that might work, to actually, you instead of connecting directly to, you're taking your router and running it directly to a switch, you take your router, your Wi-Fi router, and run that to a Wi-Fi bridge, and then connect that to your switch, and then your wiring through the house or whatever, or you just use Wi-Fi to get to your components as well. The plus is that you get isolation there from the outside line. The minus is that all of the potential issues of competition for bandwidth can become a player. But that's one example. Telephone lines, they actually make opto isolators that use basically a photo. It uses I don't know if it's a laser or a diode or whatever, but it actually isolates the outside line from the indoor wiring again. But like E0AYJ was mentioning, if it's strong enough and close enough, it can actually induce current and voltages in your house internal wiring, which I'm pretty sure is what happened to me. And so having protective devices scattered all over the house, pretty much nothing of value anyway, plugged directly into a wall reset. Anyway, that helped, and and one of the surge protectors actually gave its all to do its job. I'm actually going to call the company. It was a Belkin power strip that blew up there, and I've heard that sometimes they're interested, and they'll actually send you a new one if you send the old blown up one to them, and so they can do some analysis on it. So I might give them a call and see if they're interested in that. But anyway, back to that W6KD.
Thanks for that, Bob. Well, the concern isn't so much the TV or the phones. I mean, maybe losing the phones ringing and not having TV I could not get too terribly upset about that, but it's the internet that is provided by the telco lines if they're sent to you that way, or over the cable. That's my case. I have a modem that, in fact, I have far faster internet bandwidth and speed than I would get using AT&T or any other provider. So I'm worried about Lightning, even though it's not as great, not as big a problem here, but still, to me, that's the weak link. Yet it's probably the most important connection because it's the internet. So, anyone else have thoughts about protecting your capability to stay on the air that is linked to a reflector and not have your devices fly off the desk with a lightning strike? Let's take you now. Before we move on, please key up.
Z W6KD M.
I have ZL2RO and W6KD. ZL2RO. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Yeah, well, I've been listening to that, and that was quite interesting because I've made my my D-Star hotspot, high-powered hotspot, is off the grid now. It's solar and battery driven completely. The radio, the O-Droid, everything is run off batteries and solar to recharge the battery, which has now been working pretty well for the 3 weeks that it's been commissioned, so to speak. But I overlooked one thing, which I'm hopefully going to rectify this weekend, is a backup supply for the router, because most of the time over here in New Zealand anyway, and it's probably the same for you guys, if you get a power cut, generally your telco is still online because they're on a completely different circuit. It's that case here anyway, and so if I can have my router modem on a battery supply as well, that could uninterrupted, so a backup supply, so to speak. I'll still have access to D-Star, still have access to the outside world with the radio. So that's just my little project that I've had going now. So I don't know if that is interesting to anybody, but that's what I've been up to anyway. Mike, over.
Well, that's certainly one way of keeping the your station, your internet, or whatever up and running. Of course, that's a separate issue, is being able to switch to a battery backup for loss of power. Well, either forced or unforced. So, yeah, that's some interesting thinking, and we appreciate it. W6KD, go ahead.
One other thought, and this didn't really apply to me, but for folks that do have HF stations in particular, with outdoor antennas or outdoor towers or whatever, with a coax coming in the house, and of course, there's we won't get into what needs to be done to properly protect the feed line, coming into the house. But even if it is protected, a direct hit will get past whatever kind of protected device you put on there, unless you have a lot of money. A lot of the commercial setups where they actually use welded, bonded, they actually thermally weld the ground straps to the grounding wires, and they use a whole ring of grounding points around the base of the tower, and so those guys actually routinely take lightning hits and manage to survive that stuff. But if you're just the average Joe and can't afford that, you have to consider what's connected to that radio, because in the good old days, I used to unplug the radios, in the house if we had a lightning storm, and you may not think about it, but a lot of radio equipment anymore is internet connected. So if your radio is connected to a coax, and that radio is also connected to a component which is in turn connected to your local area network, you just provided an ingress path to all your computer equipment through your LAN cabling, and not something the idea of losing all the computers in here makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Just the hassle and having to rebuild and reprogram and reset everything up. Just the thought of it makes my blood run cold. So yeah, it's anyway, the world has changed a little from when I got started in this anyway, and so yeah, the network cabling is another thing that needs to be looked at. Interestingly, on the cable piece of it also, it used to be you could get surge protectors that had CATV protection built onto them, but they tell you can't really use that anymore because the surge protectors actually will interfere and prevent your broadband internet from working, because they used to be relatively narrow bandwidth writing on the cable, and now it's much broader reset. So anyway, I'm not aware of any, at least not prohibitively expensive protective devices. So maybe the air gap with a Wi-Fi bridge or something is the right answer for protecting, a network inside the house. Like I said, I'm still thinking about it. Back to the net, 36 Teddy.
Well, since I've had cable installed, which is, in the overall scheme of things, fair out lightning and static protection. And he said there's nothing that he can offer. All he did was just put a barrel connector that at the termination point on the wall, which is really nothing, and then screwed a copper wire to it and ran it over to actually the electrical panel and outside, and then just decided that was going to be a good ground. I'm not sure that it is, but still, that was it. And it makes me nervous because I don't want to lose the internet, and I'll do what it takes to keep it up, even in the worst of conditions. Any other stations or thoughts from stations about lightning strikes and protecting your your house coax wiring, that is the network and all the goodies connected to it? Please key up.
K6J.
K6JN, go ahead.
I found this whole thing interesting, and I really know there's things I need to do. I've done some of the things Bob talked about, but not all of them. But it is true for people with external antennas, coax and all that, you can do a lot. But as Bob pointed out, there's more to it than that. I have a friend who had a lightning strike next to his house. It didn't quite hit it, but it wasn't the neighbor's yard. I think it had to be very. Anyway, he had I think 3 outdoor antennas, and all the standard stuff, the lightning arresters or something that would supposedly take it to ground. Then the coax came in, and that was grounded, and all of the equipment in the shack went to a big old copper grounding bar. That was in the big old cable went to the outside with stakes in the ground very deep, and several of them. Sounded like he had done everything he could. He lost all kinds of stuff because the lightning came in on the landline telephone line and just wiped out a whole bunch of stuff. Once it got into other wiring in the house, but it was traced back to it got into the house through the landline telephone wires. So you got to think of everything, and it's a really good story to be talking about every so often. Thanks very much, K6JM.
Thank you, Jim. I wonder if our polyphasers really, I don't want to get too deep into protecting the antenna and coax. We could take that up, we could talk about grounding for days on end and never end a roundtable, but Are the polyphasers still about the best inline protection, assuming that you properly connect them to a grounding strap? I mean, there's quite a procedure that you can use. Is that the state of the art, so to speak, to protect your antenna and your equipment behind it? Stations, please key up.
KE0AYJ.
KE0AYJ, go ahead.
And 6HKH in the group, KE0AYJ once again. We did testing on that also, played with it just for demonstration. If it takes out a polyphaser, chances are the damage is already done. Lightning is a lot quicker than the blow time on those little gas tubes. The best thing to do is ground. And you can put the polyphasers in there, and if lightning comes anywhere near your shack, not only unplug your power supplies and turn off your radio, but disconnect all the lead-in wires and go outside and make sure they're thrown to ground. Either that or have a master ground that you can throw and do a sacrificial coaxial switch that one position throws all the antennas to ground. The more ground, the better, as Bob was pointing out, is the happiest. But yeah, once those polyphasers take a hit, everything's basically taking a hit. And I don't even know what a telephone line is anymore. And right now I'm talking completely on battery power and solar power. And even the furnace right now just kicked on, and it's on battery power. So I'm isolated from the grid, and any passive device is more susceptible than an active device because it's just free floating, basically, and becomes a target. An active device can induce, a passive device will collect. And by that I mean it'll gather electrons out of the air, and just like a tower does. A tower is a passive device, not powered, not under power. An antenna, if you're transmitting or receiving and the radio's turned on, it's an active device. So you got to watch for things like that. And more ground the better. But polyphasers, no thank you. I don't use them.
Well, I mean, I've got a difficulty with this. I understand that if you anticipate lightning, being able to throw a switch and take all of your antenna coaxes to ground, the antennas to ground, either at the base or shortly down the coax. I mean, that is the ultimate. I did that at one house where I had just towers everywhere. But some of these polyphasers are $60, $70, $80. I'm shocked to hear that short of a direct lightning strike, which I get, I don't think that there's anything that can salvage or protect your coax and your equipment behind the coax on a direct lightning strike. That is, it hits your antenna. But short of that, if what you say is true, then why even bother? There's got to be a purpose for these expensive boys. Now, I've never had one blow. I have several of them in use, and now I'm scratching my head over that. So I presume there's some purpose to them. Otherwise, it's a big waste of money. I don't know. Anyone care to comment? Please key up.
W6KD.
W6KD, go ahead.
Yeah, my understanding is that the gas discharge tubes are for protecting you from pulses, from nearby, from nearby, not right next to the house, but a half a mile away maybe or whatever. If you have a stroke that can induce enough current, not to smoke your radio, but enough to cause problems with the semiconductors and stuff in it, and and they're reputed to help with that. But yeah, direct strike or a really close one, none of that stuff's going to help. A friend of mine that he took me up to Denver. We went over to a facility that's owned by FEMA where they have a whole bunch of really high-end comm equipment, and they use air gaps and really robust lightning ground systems around the antennas and stuff, and yeah, and unless you're willing to put that kind of money into it, you're probably you got to roll the dice like everybody else. And some areas are worse for it than others. But yeah, I have a bunch of polyphaser stuff that I've used through the years. But I will say that I got some wind-induced EMF on a rotatable dipole a long time ago. That when the Santa Ana winds would blow down in Southern California, it would induce enough voltage on across the it was a classic dipole, one side grounded, one side on the hot lead, and I had an almost inch-long arc sparking off inside my antenna tuner in the shack because it was arcing across the air gap in the big capacitor in the antenna tuner. And it wasn't from lightning, it was from the voltage that was building up on the antennas. That really dry, sandy air was blowing across the antenna there at 80 miles an hour all day long in the Santa Ana winds. And anyway, the polyphasers cured that right away. Once I put the gas discharge tubes in the feed line, I never saw that again.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. I've seen wind-induced ghosting, especially if you have a TV attached to a rooftop antenna that maybe isn't quite as stable as it should. But the super high winds, assuming you just have this is probably silly because we're talking about twin lead. Or ladder line running down, and you look outside and it's windy, but there's no lightning or other weather, and yet you're getting what you normally would see with vicinity lightning, the kind of ghosting on your TV. So very interesting. We can talk about grounding, and it may be a topic down the road. There's a station that is almost sole job is to ground antennas for the federal government and make them immune to lightning. Of course, he uses high-end stuff, but the concepts that he has related to me, and he's appeared on the roundtable in years past, that might be something worthwhile. And also, there's another station that has some expertise on specialty situations where you simply want to protect your equipment and from lightning strikes. And there's a claim of ways of doing it. I'll have to take a look at that, and I'm also going to check into what the cable companies have to say about lightning, and perhaps get a report on that as well. All right. Well, let's just move on. Let me be fair about this. Anything further on lightning, and then we'll take in. But we got to keep moving. Stations, please key up. Already nothing seen or heard. I wanted to mention before we got too far along that ABC has canceled the Tim Allen sitcom Last Man Standing, and did so despite strong ratings. And it's an important thing to us because, as you know, Tim Allen is he's a licensed ham, and he has quite a station that's occasionally used or displayed during the show. The producer, NN6JA, is a strong supporter of D-Star and this net. And, we've had special event stations that have been held on the set of Last Man Standing. And it is just, quite frankly, surprising to me. There's some various articles, depending upon, where you go to get your news, that suggest that perhaps, it was canceled because Tim Allen is a conservative, supports Trump, etc., and that the show reflects the fans of the show lean more towards the current administration than the former. I don't know if any of that is true, but what is so puzzling, and it's just the way it is, I guess, is that this sitcom that starred Tim Allen as Mike Baxter, most of you know about it, was doing real well in ratings, especially for its time slot on Fridays. It's been a syndication. I'm not sure if that is affected by it, but it was a surprise to fans and allegedly the production staff. No negotiations, just a plain cancellation from ABC, despite the show doing fairly well and getting good ratings. So it's just a sad state of affairs, and perhaps we can learn more details about that at some point in the future. But boy, I'm sad. I know it's a popular show for many amateurs, and it was an interesting time when a station that was a part of the roundtable on a regular basis was the VE, and gave the test to Tim Allen on the set. And it might be an interesting story to have the station, the VE group involved, to relate again how they went down. It's just a fun story, nothing specific that is particularly interesting to D-Star, but our special event stations are included D-Star when we were there, so I thought I'd point that out. Let me see if anybody has any comments on this. I don't expect a lot. Please key up. Yeah, I'm just more of FYI than anything else. I have been asked again, Bob asked this in my absence last week, if there was anything that in the run-up to Dayton concerning D-Star that has been added that perhaps wasn't on the slate of affairs, and either forums or demonstrations or anything else concerning D-Star or, open source or open digital systems that have been added, perhaps out of pressure from those who want to hear about them for Dayton, that perhaps those that are heading off sooner than later ought to know about. And if there's anything about Dayton that those that have gone there, been there, or are there, or in the vicinity and sniffed around, that we should be aware of, this might be an interesting time to take that up. We'll see if it's interesting or pertinent. Stations, please key up.
K6JM.
K6JM, go ahead.
Hey, Mike, you caught me a little unawares. I was trying to dig out an email that I wrote. I did post on some D-Star-oriented Yahoo group or other, and some people gave me some ideas. And turns out there's like a schedule for D-Star-oriented things on the DStarInfo.com website. But basically, it's very similar to other years. Obviously, a new location, but Thursday night at Marion's Pizza, which used to be quite a drive from Dayton, but now it's quite close to the new site. And then Friday at 1 o'clock, Robin is hosting a D-Star Forum. John, K7ZE, will be talking. And there was not much given in the write-up other than they're going to be talking about new products and new software. Let's see. First, there's a list of booths that will have D-Star things going on, and some of those booths will have other digital voice modes also. An example would be wireless phones. So it's not particularly different, although every year when you talk to a vendor, they'll have been doing something in the last year. So I'm looking forward to talking to all of the vendors with digital voice products. There's a DMR barbecue Saturday night. I doubt. Well, I don't want to presume, but I don't know. It sounds like it's focused on DMR, and I think one of the DMR vendors is hosting it, so it'll probably be focused on that. Anyway, I'm looking forward to it, and I'll do my best to get good notes back to you, K6JM.
Well, as you know, you usually are an important source post Dayton because you're able to lean on these people and get information out of them that we otherwise wouldn't expect to hear, or wish they hadn't said to you. But then that's beside the point. Your point is, your job is just to report on it. So we're looking forward to it. And I haven't seen anything special. I guess you should bring your rubber field boots just in case. I don't know if there's going to be cattle running around or livestock, but that might be fun. So I'm hoping the weather is good for everyone that does go, but we will expect full reports from all. And most importantly, what is next if the vendors that produce D-Star or digital devices or hotspots or access points, such as the OpenShark or OpenSpot and the others that make these so-called, multi-mode devices and radios, what they think is the future holds. That is, what is next. It'd be kind of like interrogating Jonathan Naylor and asking him, all right, so we appreciate your work. It's exciting and fun, but what are you thinking about 6 months down the road? What should we expect as we plan to spend our hard-earned money on digital gear? So I'm looking forward to a report. Unfortunately, I can't go, and I need to go. In fact, I'm going to see if I can't get someone to volunteer to let me tag along one of these years. Anybody else with anything about Dayton and, that might be of some interest to those that are going to be going? We'll take you now, please, Kia. We welcome in 8LN. Go ahead.
Good evening to everyone on the net. This is Terry, Battle Creek, Michigan. The D-Star Forum will be at noon at Dayton, noon in Conference Room 1. And also ICOM is sponsoring a Friday evening get-together for D-Star folks at the Drury Inn on Miller Road. All that information is on the D-Star info page under conference or meetings. It'll say info 2017 InfoCon, even though there's not going to be an InfoCon session, so to speak. But 6:30 at the Drury Inn on Friday evening, and I know Ray Novak is bringing one of the brand new ID 4100 radios we'll be giving away. So just wanted to pass that along. N8LN, Terry in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Well, thanks, Jerry, for that update, and appreciate it. I am sure that everybody will have a good time, and of course, we fully expect listeners and participants to the Thursday night D-Star Roundtable to win every prize, because that's just how it must be. Any further comment about Dayton? Anything that we should be wary of? Please, Kia. All right, nothing seen or heard. there's been some developments in the reflector arena. We've talked a bit about work that's being done on an XLX reflector, both as to software and hardware, that would be the way to I'm struggling for words here, that would produce a transcoding server that would truly and digitally allow transcoding between the digital modes, D-Star to DMR, Fusion, et cetera. And while, we don't like to get ahead of ourselves when it comes to actual equipment and software, if it doesn't exist, I guess we could talk about it, but there's too much vaporware out there. But this seems to be something that conceptually I think is important for those who look forward to not just multi-mode use, but actual transcoding between digital modes would be of some interest, as we seem to be moving in that direction. So I'll entertain, well, let's just, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pick on W6KD, and then we'll take other stations, because it's not just, a few people to know about this, but, well, I've done my run-up, and I think that's all I need to say. So W6KD, can you give us a little bit of a heads up on the progress that you've seen on this XLX server, and where it's standing now, and perhaps maybe your view on what the next move will be? W6KD, go ahead.
Okay, Mike. Yeah, hopefully John K6KD can chime in here, because he's a bit more involved with it than I am, actually. But we've talked about it a couple of times in the last month. The idea being that Luke and company, the guys that developed the XLX reflectors, have been working on on transcoding D-Star to the other digital modes, in particular D-Star to DMR, and that would be extensible at some point to Fusion and also to P25 and NXDN, since they all use the same version of the vocoder, AMBI+2. And anyway, I've kind of been taking a wait and see approach to whether or not the theory of decoding and then recoding on the other side of what I call the ambi divide would actually work. And anyway, Luke has gotten a hold of a DVSI transcoding, a DVSI vocoder dongle that's got 3 separate vocoders on it, and he's got a prototype working that removes any doubt from the feasibility of doing it. It's working. It works very well, actually, much better than any of the other translating kind of setups I've seen. There are a number of folks that are doing translation between D-Star and DMR, for example, by taking it down all the way down to analog and then re-encoding it back up the chain, and that induces a lot of degradation in the signal. It doesn't sound very good, and it's sort of the radio equivalent. I've said this before. It's sort of like the old spy movies where they take the 2 telephones and take the 2 receivers and turn them upside down from each other and then duct tape them together. And you can make a connection that way, but the quality's not very good. Anyway, so it's beyond the concept phase. It's actually working in a beta right now. The downside of it is that it requires a hardware solution. So you can't just, as we do with the X reflectors, put up a. Let me reset real quick. Anyway, you can't just put up a server on a virtual private server on the Amazon cloud, for example, or whatever, and make it work. You actually have to have a physical device to do the transcoding, and it's not particularly cheap either. right now, the device that Luke is using to do this, to do a single, to do a pair of channels, it's a $600 gadget from DVSI. So it's quite expensive to implement the capability, and it has to be on a dedicated hardware server. At least the transcoding part has to be. So anyway, what I would expect to see in the future is that we will have the ability to transcode from D-Start to DMR and eventually the other modes as well, but on a limited basis. It's not going to be something you see on every reflector module everywhere. It's not feasible to do that. You have to, because of the cost and because of the requirement to have actual hardware doing the work. It's going to be something you see more on a very selective basis. But for nets and for perhaps public service events or emergency type stuff, the ability is definitely going to be there. The concept has been proven now. It's just a matter of Luke and company fielding it. They're working feverishly on it. They're trying to get it all ready to go for the European ham radio conference, which is in Friedrichshafen, Germany. It's sort of the European equivalent of Hamvention, and it's held, I believe, in June or July. I can't remember, but they're working hard to try to have it ready to go for that. So it's not a theory, and it's right around the corner. So we probably will see some of that capability in the very, very near future, back in that W6KD.
Bob, thanks for that. Well, let's see if John's around, K6KD. Are you with us? If so, anything further to add to this discussion? It's pretty interesting stuff. Go ahead.
No, I was only gone momentarily, just for that one transmission. No, nothing further to add.
Oh, okay. Very good. Well, so let's take this down to earth just a bit. And I understand that it's still in beta, but this seems that it will provide true digital DMR to D-Star, D-Star to DMR using specific reflectors, XLX reflectors. We've talked before about how they're different than XRF and REF. So you would use this reflector that is, as I think it's been described, as kind of it's got a transcoding server running it, and I'm looking for a correction because I haven't been in the middle of this as much as W6KD and K6KD have. So you can connect to the server, assuming it's fully functional, and key up on whatever radio you like. It eventually, I presume, will be any of the digital modes, including Fusion and P25, etc. And you could hear it equally well listening on D-Star, and of course that's the big obstacle to overcome. But I take it, Bob, that that you've at least given it a listen or been able to check it out, and from what I can tell, I guess it is the Cat's Meow. So just any, I guess I'm kind of seeking some comment on this, that this is just not a gadget, and it's not even remotely close to any of the connections that occasionally you'll see on an XRF where they try to bring in DMR and to a D-Star reflector, and it's and who knows what else. But this is going to make it kind of a one radio go everywhere solution. So I'm looking to see if I've got it right, and see if you can flesh this out just a bit more for us. W6KD, go ahead.
Okay, well, from a user perspective, it looks like a regular XLX reflector. You connect to let's say, we'll just use 500 as a number. You connect to XRF 500 or DCS 500 or REF 500 alpha or whatever, whatever module. And if the transcoding is enabled on that particular module, let me back up half a step. The DMR users connect to the same reflector using the reflector as a master server, just like a Brandmeister master server or a DMR Plus master server. In this particular case, they would connect to the XLX reflector as the master server, and then the talk group that they use to link it to a particular module is 4001 through 4026. That corresponds to A through Z. So for example, if the DMR user connects to the to the XLX reflector, using MMDVM, for example, they would put the address of the master server in the INI file, and they would connect to it, and then they would key up on talk group 4002, which is the equivalent of B. That's the B module. And anyway, they can talk to any other DMR user that's on that particular module, which looks like a talk group. And by the way, if there are any D-Star users on module B on the D-Star side, they will hear them as well and talk to them. And same thing, a D-Star user connects to, XRF 500 Bravo, and if there are any DMR users that are on the DMR side on that module, then they'll hear each other. And it sounds great. It really, John and I were trying it out a few days ago, going back and forth, DMR to D-Star, D-Star to D-Star, DMR to DMR. It sounds great. You really can't tell a difference in quality, and much better than anything I've ever seen in terms of a transcoding solution. It's expensive and like I said, requires hardware to do it, but it does work very well. So once it's fielded, and I don't expect a whole flood of them to show up, but they'll show up here and there, and I would expect that the sysops will probably identify a certain number of modules reset. Anyway, I would expect them to identify a certain number of modules or certain modules on the reflector as transcoding modules, and if you get on there, you talk not only to the users on your mode, but on the other mode if they're there as well. And the transcoding occurs automatically. You don't have to turn anything on or off or whatever. If it's there, it works. And interestingly, also that same XLX software allows even if you don't have the transcoding feature, it still allows it serves as a DMR reflector as well. So the great convergence is upon us. Back to the net, W6KD.
K6.
Thank you, Bob. K6JM, go ahead.
Okay, well that helps me a lot understanding what the XLX guys are doing. That's a really good explanation. I guess I have a question, and that is can you imagine a way in which, let me give you an analogy, the typical D-Star repeater gateway, most admins allow users to send commands which will unlink from whatever is currently linked, maybe the default reflector, and then link to some other chosen one dynamically. And then sometimes the software will put it back after inactivity, or people will put it back themselves. And it seems to me, you can only use, you can't have 5 people all trying to link to different places, but everybody gets along. And so I link to Reflection from Charlie, and I use it for a while, and other people use it too, or wait, and then they link it somewhere else. I'm wondering if there would be a way for people to ask this hardware transcoding system to connect to different places. So, for example, maybe I ask, I want to come in on XLX 500 Bravo, and I'd like it to be connected to talk group, some other, not doesn't have to be Bravo, some dynamic DMR talk group. And I'm just curious if Bob has talked to Luke about that, or if there's any way to do some dynamic linking, if you will, one at a time. Back to Mike, and then you can maybe ask Bob. This is K6JM.
W6KD, go ahead.
Well, what Luke and the guys at the XLX team, Luke and John Luke, they're working on strictly incorporating this into an XLX reflector. But what they're also doing as a byproduct of that is proving the concept. And since their software is open source, they're going, their source code is going to give a very clear picture of how this can be done. And if I would envision, but this isn't going to be something Luke is doing. This is something somebody else would have to do. But it's certainly, certainly once once they've released the code and the world gets to see how this works, then I would fully expect that at some point someone's going to figure out how to implement this to work as an ancillary program, for example. Just like on a repeater you have DMON or something like that. It would certainly be feasible to implement it on a gateway, whether it be your hotspot if you're so inclined and well enough funded to be able to afford to do it for yourself, or possibly for repeaters as well. It certainly will be within the realm of possible, but that's not what's being done right now. Right now, it's strictly speaking transcoding on an XLX reflector module and its paired counterpart on the other mode. So you can think of it like having an A through Z module on D-Star, and then a 4001 through 4026 module or talk group for DMR, and on the transcoding, on the ones that are enabled for transcoding, those are paired together. So if the A module is designated as a transcodable, then 4001 and A will be linked together, and both sides of that, both of them will be able to see each other. But if they're not enabled as transcoding, then it appears as almost like two separate reflectors, one on the DMR side, one on the D-Star side. That's what they're doing right now. But what they're doing is going to open. I see it as opening a door in a big way for other applications.
All right, appreciate the question, Jim. Thanks for the answer, Bob. Stations, if you have questions about this, keeping in mind that it's in testing and it's part of the transcoding and cross mode goals that I think that well, let me not opine on this. Stations with questions, please key up.
K6KD.
Well, there's K6KD. I doubt that you have a question, but thanks for jumping back in. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll just make an extremely brief comment to respond to Jim's question. The linking will still have the full capability on the D-Star side of things, so that while there will be a pairing of the talk groups to the modules on D-Star, those those modules, you have full flexibility as far as linking. So, so that the module B on an XLX reflector could be linked to module K on some other reflector, a non-XLX reflector. Specifically, if we desire to open up DMR to or open up, let's say a net, even say the roundtable for discussion to DMR hypothetically, that could be talk group 4001 on XLX 212, and anybody on the constellation on any of the other three reflectors would be able, because they are linked, would be able to to participate. So I think that's kind of the spirit of what Jim was asking. Back in that.
Oh, okay, John. Appreciate that. Keeping in mind that XLX is a fancier or upgraded version of X reflectors, and as we should know, or we all should know, you can connect X reflectors to X reflectors, modules to module. It isn't, the user normally can't do that, but the admin certainly can. It's one of the great flexibilities of the X reflectors. All right, anyone have any questions on what you've heard thus far? Please key up. Well, so maybe everybody's on top of this, and it's not quite the new news, or perhaps it's a lot to chew on. It's tough to do a conceptual topic because there is part of this, the foot is in the cement, and another part of it is still floating around being worked out. But the point is a significant development since we last talked about this, where we knew the software was at least up and running, although it's not available, and it's going to be open source, as both John and Bob commented. But now we have the hardware component, which was just as equally important, that is now in test. And so far, sounds pretty good that this may be the future of transcoding, or some call it cross mode, and would be the solution. Not. Of course, it would be fun to have a radio that, Well, anyway, this would. I mean, you could. There's all kinds of implications here. You can own one radio. You don't have to have them all. That doesn't mean that you throw your open spot in the dumpster, but still, and the DV4 mobile, I mean, wouldn't become useless. There are purposes to those devices, but one radio, and with a properly, I don't want to use the word equipped, but set up access device, a hotspot, to be sometimes call them, that is really little more than what you have now. I mean, it is different, but still, you're there, just as you would be connected to any other reflector. It has implications for the future of repeaters. What will it mean, for example, to the DMR repeater service? You no longer need to connect or use a radio and find a DMR repeater. You just connect to this and off you go. Of course, we're talking about way down the line, but I find it fascinating. So, any further comments or questions before we move on? Please key up. Alrighty, nothing seen or heard, so I appreciate W6KD and K6KD helping us out on this. I had, before we get into opening this up for questions and topics, one station wanted to know, I got this in an email, what is the latest of 220 on D-Star? They have the Kinma D74, it does 220, and where are the 220 D-Star repeaters? I mean, it's kind of a broad question because you know, obviously people are listening around the world, but still, is there a 220 repeater, D-Star repeater that is available either on the commercial or amateur side, or is there really not much happening? Did some stations put up 220 machines and find that you know, the frequency pairs can be better used? Is there even any excitement to putting 220 to use? It seems to me that, at least for D-Star, that this is one way of putting up a D-Star repeater and without having to battle, especially in the major metropolitan areas, for frequency pairs. Stations who have comments or who know and can perhaps bring us up to speed on D-Star 220, please key up.
K6JM N5VRP.
I have K6JM and N5VRP. First to Jim, K6JM. Go ahead.
Hi, Mike. I read a post by John K7VE of Northwest Digital Radio that he had put up a 220 repeater. His approach, I think he had that Yaesu combination analog and system fusion repeater. But Northwest Digital Radio sells a cable that acts kind of like a sound card interface, and he was able to put up an additional module or something with some. I don't know what you use. I read it, gosh, at least a month ago now. But he used some sort of not expensive 220 radios, and you know, the whole thing is, the limiting factor is D-Star capable 220 radios, and there's only the one HD from Kenwood. You know, I guess what I'd love to see is somebody put up a company like Kenwood putting out a mobile version of this same radio that has 3 bands and does D-Star and 220. That would make a big difference. But actually, you know, anybody who can get a modem, from a GMSK modem to any of the other ways of connecting radios to computers, it's very easy to put up just instead of using VHF or UHF radios, just use 220 radios. So it's really kind of like a very simple problem to put it up. It's just why do it until you get enough users out there with 220 capable D-Star radios. Back to you. This is K6JM.
Yeah, you know, I wish ICOM would pull the curtain back and actually look around the corner into where D-Star is going, not where it's been, and think about this. But we'll see. All right, got it. N5VRP, welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, Mike and the net. The only thing I'd add to that would be, because there's no activity where I'm at, of course, but that is a way to definitely do it. And yeah, there's only that one radio. How people can find out about DMR or D-Star or any some of the Fusion and some of the others, I just received not long ago a 2017 to 2018 repeater guide directory from ARRL, and that tells you in there what digital modes are available in your community, whether they're present or not present, and which bands. And it also lets you know the code that you need also with that, with DMR and et cetera. So there's one place to go to see and keep up to date on something like that. Of course, there's apps that you can get on an Android. I don't know, I guess on a iPhone too, but a repeater guide that way. But although I'm not really totally pleased on how they did this last repeater guide or directory, because they left out who the actual party is who owns that or maintains that system, whether it be analog or digital mode or modes overall. So I thought I'd just add that in. It was fairly new that I saw this and wanted to know what Houston, Texas, and Dallas had for DMR in some of the other modes, Fusion. And it is in there in the new directory. Back to you there, Mike.
Yeah, that's something to think about. You never think about the books. I mean, there's two apps, or maybe three, that seem to be current that are available both on the Android and the iOS devices for both the ARRL repeater guide, and not having them, I bought them every year after year, and then never opened them, or rarely did. But I would, the last one I saw I had D-Star, and then it was divided by the bands within D-Star. So I think the substance of the purpose of the question was to get a feel on whether Kenwood's new radio was pushing 220 in conjunction with its wide availability, since there has been less and less activity on it outside of D-Star, and whether this was something that was taken off, or it's just kind of lollygagging around waiting for either more Kenwood radios to make their way into amateur hands, or for someone else like ICOM to release a radio that's 220, which is seemingly so unlikely. But we can certainly throw ICOM up against the wall, that is their representative at Dayton, and find out why, or what their plans are, if any. Certainly, if ICOM is not interested in 220 in their radios, that's a problem. Of course, I'm not sure what interests ICOM at this point in advancing D-Star, so we'll find out. I'm hoping that things change. All right. Thank you, Dennis. Anyone else with any comments on 220? Let's take you now. Please key up.
W6KD.
W6KD, go ahead.
Yes, it's sort of a peripheral topic, but as much as I like the idea of taking D-Star to another band, this is that the battle of economics that we were talking about with the other modes. I talked to a ham today that ordered a Kytera MD380. It's a DMR radio, entry-level DMR radio. $88 with a drop-in charger, a programming cable, and the software from Amazon. $88. You buy a Kenwood THD74 and a drop-in charger, you could buy 7 MD380s for the same price. 7 of them. If somebody's going to Dayton, you see Ray Novak or the ICOM guys, ask them how they're going to deal with that kind of competition, because they're losing the war here, and in 220, there's only one radio that'll do it, and that's the arguably very good Kenwood radio, but it's just darn expensive, and then and so you've got to put infrastructure up that counts on people buying one of the most expensive radios out there, a radio which costs 7 times as much as a competitive mode. It's not a really good sign, I'm afraid. Anyway, back to that W6KD.
that's a great point. I mean, hams on D-Star and on digital, generally, they go where the activity is. Whether they look for it on a last heard list or go to flip through the dashboards of their favorite reflectors. And I'm beginning to, if you veer over the horizon a bit, the importance of repeaters and having specific radios that operate on specific bands are not going to be the focus. If hams vote with their pocketbook, using a trite phrase, and they can do everything they want on pretty much any digital, well, that is, communicate digitally and talk to guys, and now possibly on any other digital mode. Finding, or worrying about whether there's a 220 repeater around. I mean, certainly if you have an E74, why not? But still, assuming you don't have that radio, and you want to keep up with the digital modes, the interest is going to increase, I think, especially in a lot of the sunspot cycle, and we've talked about that several times. It could be that, the hotspot is really going to be the way to participate in this with the least investment and being able to do the most and ultimately have the greatest amount of fun. Plus, there's a lot of experimentation, homebrew involved. Appliance operators are probably going to have, the open spot's always going to be there, but I agree with that, Bob. Anyone else have any comments further on 220 or what you've heard thus far? Let's take you now before we move on. Please key up. All right, nothing sooner heard. So we've been in now a couple hours into tonight's Thursday night D-Star Roundtable. So let's stop the topic. Just take a break. There's plenty more to talk about. Although I'm not too interested quite yet in, challenging the longest run of the Thursday night D-Star Roundtable. Certainly far from it. But let's get into questions and topics. That is, this is the open segment where you're not bounded by what you've heard tonight, although you can certainly ask about it. But questions that you have that you'd like to pose to those that are best equipped to answer, or if there's a topic that you'd like to broach, either starting tonight or perhaps letting me put it together for another night, this is that time of this net. So, stations, please give.
KM6JEE.
KM6JEE. Greetings. Go ahead.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for clearing up some stuff early on and pointing out the difficulties that I had with both the DVAP and the radio itself. But just out of curiosity, with dealing with just the cheaper versions of things, one of the things that I'm interested in is actually having something that's reliable. And when dealing with the cheaper radios, is there a reliability issue in all of these modes, or are people not noticing that and just going for the cheap and buying two?
Well, that's a good question. You bring me back to the beginning of the availability of the Wolfang and Baofeng and the other fangs that initially out the gate, they were kind of worked, but the price was so cheap that I think the first E-Star ones were like $20-25. You could, put several in your satchel, and when one either hit the pavement or quit working or the battery gave up, you just threw it in the nearest dumpster and turned on the next one. So I'm not sure where we're at, if the radios have gone up in quality with price, or if it's, as we would expect, quality improves, price goes down. Let's find out. Stations, please key up.
K6JM.
K6JM, go ahead.
Okay, Mike. It's an interesting question, and of course it's true that there are some really, really inexpensive. I bought, one year I went to Dayton and didn't bring any radios. I had been planning to bring one and forgot anyway, so I got there and I thought, well, it would be fun to see how these Baofeng radios, and I bought a little analog VHF, I think it was a dual band, I can't even remember. Man, it was cheap. I'm not putting it down. I mean, it worked, but and I was surprised. They gave me a battery and a charger and a cable and all that. But I wouldn't have wanted to drop it. But on the other hand, went to a Pacificon a couple of years ago. There was a digital dinner where we invite people with D-Star, DMR, Fusion, and so forth. And one guy talked about he had a inexpensive DMR radio from Connect Systems, and he was up on a tower, and I forget if he dropped it from 20 feet. It wasn't on the soft ground. I forget what it was that it hit. It was scratched, but otherwise nothing broken. It worked perfectly. So there's an inexpensive digital voice radio that was built well. And I have a Icon old 91 AD that I think you could drive from about the same distance. It's no spec, I think. And so there's a lot of stuff out there. You just have to take a look. Ideally, if you can look at a real one before you buy through mail order. But it doesn't have to be just because it's cheap. It's not well built. That would be my K6JM.
All right, Jim, I just had to comment that you need to back off the mic a bit because you got really hot and just a bit, I don't want to, not muffle, but, you're just, as if you would be hot. I think it's just a matter of you got the mic in the wrong spot. So it was tough to hear you in a few, great signal, but just FYI. So comments concerning the quality of radios. And, I realized that we mentioned that, okay, look, eventually you can grab a cheap DMR radio and talk on D-Star. But, is this Titera, for example, that sells for $88? What kind of quality is it? Is that really what, we mentioned? I know why Bob mentioned it. It's the price. But is that a quality radio? And is there any value in paying more, let's say, for a more expensive radio, and let's just say with D-Star, is there something to that makes it worthwhile, or is there a particular radio mode that, assuming that the trend, I'm just talking to the future because I think that's where the question is heading or was intended. Let's just say we're down the road. We're transcoding all over the place. D-Star users are talking to everybody. So, is it just spend as much as you can, but there's no need to spend $800? Is an $88 radio worth a damn, or is it just a toy? I think we're kind of, any comments on this? I know I'm kind of flailing around to help out Keith, but still, I haven't investigated any of this. Maybe somebody has. If you have an opinion or facts, please key up.
K6 W6KD.
I have K6KD and W6KD. First, we'll take John. K6KD, go ahead.
Okay, well, the first point I'd make is it's not the mode, because the probably the least quality radio I have is a Yaesu Fusion radio. and that uses the same basically codec as the DMR radio. So, but in terms of the radios, I would say that I have in terms of handhelds, I have DMR radios, a Terra made by PowerWorks, sold by HRO. That's about $270, and I've had several people say that putting it side by side to the Motorola, you don't hear any difference. Motorola may have some additional features for the Motorola repeaters, but it's certainly a rugged radio. Excellent. And just for the fun of it, I bought a Tytera. Now, I didn't get the MD3 380. I got the for 88 or 125, whatever. I got the 390 for 165, and that's a more ruggedized version. I don't know if it sounds any better than the 380, but it's excellent. I would say that the best. I've got several D-Star radios, including the Kenwood THD-74A, and I would say that in terms of quality of audio and ruggedness, all the DMR radios I have are superior. They're superior to the Kenwood, and definitely superior to the Icon, in my opinion. Back to Nick.
Yeah, John, thanks for helping us focus because, when you think about it, this argument over, well, what sounds best, the DMR, D-Star Fusion, and there used to be fist fights and threats issued, and, I agree with you. It's not the mode, and of course, nobody could convince me that one mode sounded better than, or that any digital mode sounded better than D-Star. I mean, I would go out to the back lot and take that on. Anymore, though, it's the radio. That determines what you're going to sound like and how you're going to hear. Now, I got to tell you that generally probably Motorola has some of the best receive audio in the business, and I'd put that up against any other radio. But, of course, that aside, that's a good point. Thank you, John. W6KD, go ahead.
Yeah, my experience is very similar to John's. I don't have quite the range of HTs that he does. I've got kind of a mix of HTs and mobile radios. And in the HT department, the Terra, which is a mid-range DMR HT, it has the best receive audio, and I attribute that strictly to the audio amplifier and the speaker and the radio. Now, of course, the DMR radios don't have ham-specific stuff built into them, and so they're built for the commercial market, and as a result, they sell a lot more of them, so they can spread their development costs over a larger volume, which somewhat explains why they're cheaper. The Terra, for example, does not have GPS. It doesn't have, none of my HTs have a color display, but it doesn't have ham-specific stuff like, D-Star is a ham-specific protocol that's built, specifically for hams, as is Yaesu Fusion. So those radios were designed and manufactured, in relatively small numbers in comparison to a more generic design that's used in the commercial world. But that said, a relatively inexpensive mid-grade DMR radio, the Terra is it's a much better radio in a noisy environment than either the Icom or the Yaesu. And interestingly, the Yaesu Fusion radio and the DMR radios both use the same vocoder. And the Yaesu Fusion radios, in terms of audio quality, in terms of, I think, build quality, usability, etc., are far inferior to consumer-grade DMR radios costing, half as much, and that's just the heck of it. So yeah, let me change it. Anyway, I have not foreseen. I don't own a whole bunch of. I don't own the lowest end stuff. I have two of the Terra 7400s, TR 7400s. That's the only DMR radios. HTs I've got. I've got the one Yaesu FT2D, and then a couple of ICOM IC92s. And I like my icons. They're built very solid, and they're waterproof. But they were, when I bought them, they were both north of $500, $550 or whatever. The Terra radios were 260, 270, something like that. The Yaesu radio was 375 or something. I don't remember exactly, but the in the DMR world, you literally can buy a throwaway. They're enough cheaper, like I was talking about earlier. That MD380 is 1/7 the price of a Kenwood D74. So buy three of them. If one goes bad, drop it in the trash. Keep the charger and the battery. The economics are getting to be just about that crazy.
It is interesting to hear. I don't have any fusion equipment, and you would probably have to, take me in blindfolded and with my hands tied, except just enough space between the fingers to hold a credit card to buy fusion anything. But isn't that interesting that the fusion radios seem to be, with everything, all else being the same, they sound the worst. And that's one point. Of course, we're venturing away now further from the question than we should, but still, this is some interesting stuff. So the mindset in, setting aside budgeting over the many coming months, maybe at Dayton or post Dayton, is, it's not so much the mode, because right now, I think by now, everybody should realize that you can be on D-Star without a D-Star radio. So, let's just say, though, that you like D-Star as a primary mode. Should you still buy a D-Star radio to be able to, and let's just talk about reflectors essentially as the primary purpose of having any radio. I realize there are repeaters, but still, should you have a D-Star radio? Or is that not going to be relevant much? And instead, you find of any digital mode, the best sounding, but at least inexpensive, based upon the features radio, and then you get your hotspot together if you don't already have one, and off you go to be on whatever mode you want to be on and talk to anybody else on any other mode. I'm talking about down the road. Perhaps that's the way we should be doing things. As time goes by, of course, radios, I again assume, are going to be higher in quality, lower in price. So you look for the radio that is priced best, has the features you want, and regardless of the mode, you get it. On the other hand, there is something to be said about having separately or by itself, let's say a D-Star radio or even a DMR radio if you don't buy a DMR radio, if you want to take advantage of the infrastructure that is not reflector based. Anybody have any thoughts? Please key up. I have KM6JE and K6KD. Yeah, I think it would probably be appropriate to go back to Keith and say, well, are we hitting the mark on your question? Anyway, KM6JE, go ahead.
Well, along the same lines, Mike, is this the digital modes with the hotspots? Can we basically say that setting up your base station at this point in these modes, you're good with an HT, any mode really, and a hotspot, and you're good, and you just save some more money.
Well, that is one way to look at it. You know, you can buy what you like and build things up, but I think you're essentially correct. Let's see. K6KD, go ahead.
Well, I think I can both answer that and make the comment I was going to make. I think the bottom, well, certainly with a with the hotspots now, the multi-mode hotspots, you can use it with any of the three modes. But I think the final analysis is, as far as which one to get, it depends upon, I think the biggest consideration is, you know, the people you want to talk to. If you know a bunch of people, then they're all on D-Star reflector or reflectors, you probably want a D-Star radio. If they're on different DMR talk groups, you're probably going to want a DMR radio, because you're not going to, it's not, you can't use a D-Star radio and go anywhere on DMR, and similarly, you can't use a DMR radio and go anywhere you want on D-Star. There are going to be specific, you know, think of the transcoding as, it's resource limited because of the hardware and cost, but, you know, think of, you're in two different countries, but you have specific areas, specific openings in the border that you can get through, but you're still, you know, if you're going to want to wander around in one area, you're going to need to have a radio associated with that mode. Anyway, bottom line is, where if most of the people you're wanting to talk to are on D-Star, get a D-Star radio. DMR, get a DMR radio. Back to that.
Well, that's a great point, because even if or when transcoding in however form occurs, and notwithstanding the multimodal hotspots, none of that is going to replace the features that are inherent within each mode. Great points. Stations, please key up.
W6K.
W6KD, go ahead.
Yeah, I concur with John there. You know, the fact that we can make cross mode happen, or we're about to be able to make cross mode happen, doesn't mean that radios become universal. A D-Star radio still has significant advantages operating in D-Star, not just in where it can go, but the other features involved as well. If, for example, DPRS, the GPS locator part of the system is of interest to you, that's something that you can't do with the DMR radio working in D-Star. You know, the ease at which you can move around from reflector to reflector, and in particular the ability to stand up, to independently stand up your own infrastructure. That's something that you can still do much easier and more cost effectively right now, at least in D-Star, than in other modes. They still have their strengths and weaknesses. Jonathan G4KLX has written on his blog that you know, sort of his position is sort of viva la difference. You know, each has its you know, strengths and weaknesses, and trying to make one do all isn't kind of where he's that's not the bubble he's chasing. You know, the discussion, I think, was related mostly to multi-mode repeaters, for example. Just because MMDVM can do all the modes, he doesn't think that, or, you know, what he posted on his blog anyway, said that suggests to me that he doesn't think that, making a repeater, for example, try to be everything at once, trying to be a D-Star repeater and a DMR repeater and a Fusion repeater, is the way to do it. The fact that the one piece of software can do all three allows you to choose which mode you want to use when you set up that repeater or hotspot or whatever. And trying to make it do all three at the same time isn't really what he was after. And to some degree, there's some strength in that argument, I think. Making them capable of talking to each other under limited circumstances, like in an emergency net or something like that, seems, that makes some sense, reset. But anyway, there are differences, and I think still, if you want to talk to other DMR users, better to have a DMR radio. If you want to talk to other D-Star guys, still better to have a D-Star radio. And what I'm hoping anyway is that along with the grid convergence here, we'll see some sanity start to take hold in the halls of the corporate offices of ICOM, and they'll stop gold-plating their radios with useless new features that nobody wants, and start cranking out some radios that are competitively priced, maybe with less bells and whistles. On a DMR radio, you don't get DR mode, you don't get, a lot of them don't have GPSs, you don't have, the DR mode is the directory with the, GPS-enabled directory that tells you where the nearest repeaters are, for example. There's a lot of ham-specific stuff you don't get on one of those. But I was talking to a friend, this morning that, and his position was, I leave my radio on one of two. I leave my radio and my hotspot on one of two reflectors. Virtually all the time. So I don't need all those bells and whistles. I don't use them. And here we are, the new ICOM 4100, instead of bringing out a competitively priced radio that, they've already got the 5100, which is the full bells and whistles, but now they come out with another radio with, gold-plated muffler bearings on it, and it's it's not priced as high as the 5100, but it's not priced competitively when you consider a commercial grade Hytera MD782. It's a Gigapart sells it. It's a DMR radio, 45 watt mobile for DMR, $400 with a color display. And you compare that to something like the 4100, and it's just a shame. You hope that the ICOM guys and hopefully Kenwood too will come to their senses and start building at least one bare bones radio that does the job, but doesn't have all the bells and whistles, and it's affordable. Maybe it won't be $88, but geez, 7 times more expensive. Good grief. Anyway, back to net. W6 Kitty.
Makes sense. Anything further, please, Kia? Alrighty, nothing seen or heard on that. We'll talk about it some more. Great question, Keith. Thank you. We're still on the open question, open topics. I'm not sure how far we may get with the topic, but I'll decide. If you want to pose one, we'll certainly take topics. And as you know, sometimes stations prefer, especially if they're listening later on a podcast or whatever recorded version they may have of this and that. They think of topics, and feel free to post it on the shout box. I'll pick that up, or you can email me n6hkh@me.com. It's no big deal, and let me know. We're happy to entertain it. I'm always looking for topics. So let's further our open question, open topic segment of the Thursday Night D-Star Roundtable. Stations, please key up. Well, nothing seen or heard. If you heard a question somewhere else or on a reflector or net or repeater that is related to D-Star, or at least tangentially related to digital modes, not just D-Star, and maybe you'd like to grab an answer and take it back, this is a great way to do it. I know that some of the other nets that are mostly just check-in nets don't always have answers. I mean, they try, but they many times refer stations here, and we're happy to entertain them, and you can take all the credit. So, one more time, if you got a question, let's see if we can't get an answer. Stations, please, Kia.
KM6.
KM6JEE, go ahead.
Well, Mike, I certainly don't want to hog the floor here, but since no one queued up, I'll give it a shot. When bringing this up with friends, the whole ham thing and being new to this and all, with all the security issues that are going on, the question that keeps coming up from people that may be interested in it is why the FCC has do you have any idea why the database just doesn't let you kind of hide some of the information regarding, your station?
So you're asking, when I go to the FCC database, maybe search by licensee name or call sign, there seems to be a lot there, although there's a lot that isn't there. Are you asking why isn't more of it masked? I don't hate that term because that gets into unmasking, which starts people's stomachs getting queasy. But still, you're concerned about how much information is available to the public should they decide to check on you, your call sign. Is that it? KM6JE, go ahead.
Yeah, I think since getting interested in this and trying to pose the question to get other people involved, that seems to be the thing that people point out a lot. And just curious your thoughts or others' thoughts on it.
Really, I mean, it wouldn't seem to me, it wouldn't occur to me, that the choice of, getting a license would depend in part upon how much information is public. It's not that what you can find through the SEC is unavailable elsewhere, as we all know. One of the frightening things you can do, and I recommend you not do this right after eating or before bedtime, is to Google your name. But it's an interesting question. I think there's a semi-obvious answer. Let's see if we can get it out of someone. Stations, please, Kia.
W6.
W6KD, go ahead.
Well, it's pretty much useless to engage in any kind of debate in what the federal agencies decide is public record and what isn't. But the most straightforward way of masking your street address, for example, is to use a PO box. Although in the FCC record, there's both a station, you have a station address and a mailing address. The only one that's made available to the public is the mailing address. So, the most straightforward way of keeping that out of the database is to get yourself a PO box and use that as your mailing address, or potentially use a mailing address that's not your physical street address, if you're worried about that. But I would suggest, though, that the numbers of other places where that information on you available is so pervasive that it may not even be worth doing. For example, if you own a house, your property records are generally in most places available to the public, so people can see where you live and how much your house is worth and how much you owe on it. And there are, in some states, driver's records can be obtained, for a fee or whatever. Anyway, there's 16 ways from Sunday that somebody that wants to find you can probably do it. But when it comes to the FCC, if you want to, stop the obvious exposure, the simplest way is just use a PO box.
That is one way. More directly answering the question, there's a statutory scheme and a regulatory scheme that governs the Federal Communications and the FCC. And what it does, amateur radio licenses, much like a commercial broadcasting license, is a public issuance. That is that it's a matter of public interest. So the information that is displayed is exactly what the FCC must display, just as if you were to, like any other federal agency, and same thing for local agencies, state agencies. They usually have ordinances or regulations or statutes that dictate what information is a matter of public record and what information isn't. And so what you see on the FCC website is that which is available to anybody publicly because you possess or own a amateur radio station license. And that choice of yours to do that means that your station is a matter of public knowledge. Now, there, as Bob mentioned, you shouldn't see the physical station address, but they used to display it. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that, if you recall, when you first applied for your license and upon renewal, that is maintained in a non-public record that is a transaction for getting the license or renewing it that is not part of the public record. But what you see is what is minimally required, and you can't get around it. And frankly, what little bit is there doesn't seem to bother many people, but I understand it. So, all right, appreciate the question. Stations, please key up. Well, didn't see anybody. So, any other questions or anything that you've heard about, that you've heard tonight in the topics we've discussed that you'd like to ask questions about, or maybe add something to it, especially if you weren't able to jump in earlier? Otherwise, we're going to move on. So, I usually get beaten up if I get into questions, the so-called open questions, too late in the net, because the number of stations start to dwindle, as you can well imagine. So, and it's always fun to hear what's on your mind, not necessarily what's normally on my mind, which is how this net and most nets are run anyway. So, anything further? Let's take you now. Please key up.
ZL2.
ZL2RO, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you there, Mike. I couldn't comment. I had to do something about when someone was talking about the different modes and audio quality on different manufacturers' radios and obviously different modes. Well, where I work, they use DMR, and they're all Motorola DMRs. I haven't got the specific information on the models and all that, but they're all DMR. And the audio that comes out of them is so much like a machine that nothing like this, like D-Star audio to me anyway, that I notice when I hear it or when I have to call for assistance on one of those particular radios. It's a very machine type voice that comes back to you. So that's just my comment about DMR. I've never dealt with DMR in an amateur arena. So those are just my thoughts about DMR anyway, in the way of the audio that I have heard from DMR. So that's just what I wanted to put across and say. So back to net control, to RO.
Well, first impressions are the most important. You know, as with, Motorola is a great example. They have so many models, and Motorola improves upon them, and especially in DMR, they're so programmable that you can take their top of the line and through the CPS programming software, make them sound terrible, but and almost shrill, but it pierces through jackhammering and bulldozers moving concrete. Or you can program them so that they sound as good as any stereo system you may have. I mean, it just depends upon the environment. Of course, that's not to say that that's the case with your radios. There are some piles out there in even the top of the lines, depending upon their purpose and how old and how small, and so it's like anything else. You gotta give it a test drive, unless it's the only radio available in that mode or color or whatever thing you're looking for, where there's no purpose to listening to anything else. You should listen to everything else, because ultimately you may have a lot of buttons to push, you may have a lot of features, but if you sound like trash and the audio you're hearing is equally bad, how fine and how easily you can tune the radio doesn't really mean a whole lot. So thanks, Phil. Stations, please key up.
Mike, I just want to add thank you for that. And you just hit the nail on the head. We're in a very noisy manufacturing environment, so that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, this is ZL2R. We're going to have to go QRT.
Oh, I certainly would, and we'll talk to you again. All right, I suspect that we're probably getting pretty close to the end of tonight's roundtable. I have to tell you that it's, I'm now coming up on, about 3 hours of straight sitting, and, I anticipate having to sit, and I took it easy today, but still, it's going to get to be a bit much, and I need to get up and move around. So I think what we'll do is the topics that were listed on the flyer, and by the way, if you want to get the flyer of topics and other information sent out weekly, be sure to go to the Roundtable Forum board and click on let me see what it says, I forget sometimes, sign up. That's actually a link, and go through the subscription process. It's painless, and you can get the flyer that I'm looking at. But what we have here can hold until next week. Nothing is anything that will vaporize and become irrelevant tonight. So unless somebody has any objection, I think I'm going to call for any final comments. Those stations that prefer to key up at the conclusion of the roundtable as opposed to an earlier part. I've heard various theories about why they do that, but that's neither here nor there. I suggest you key up now. Let's just see who's out there. Also, if you did key up and for whatever reason I missed you, which is rare, but I guess it could happen. I'm not ignoring you. I would like you to key up again and be counted. Well, not counted, but, participate. So how about we call this kind of like a cleanup to get us caught up on tonight's events and anything else that's on your mind regarding D-Star and Digital Radio. Before we bring tonight's roundtable to a close, so stations, please key up. Well, nothing sooner heard. So, absent, anybody throwing a fit or finding that I'm not playing nice because I'm not begging people are continuing on until the wee hours in the morning, I think we'll bring this edition of the Thursday Night D-Star Roundtable to a close. Around about 3 hours is probably pretty good. We can try to do it a little bit longer if there's things to talk about. So. I want to thank the stations who participated tonight because, as you can well imagine, without your participation, there would be no roundtable. Now, the podcast, Ming usually gets it up fairly quickly, but usually it's early the following day for us because we're still Thursday here on the West Coast of the U.S., specifically Southern California, where we have Friday to look forward to. And by noon at Friday, it'll be up. The shout box will be cleaned up. That is, everything taken out of it and then pasted into the shout box history, which is right above the shout box. And I think that's about the only thing that we have to worry about for right now. So let me remind you that there are a fair number of repeaters on what we call the constellation of repeaters, reflectors. Well, I guess I'm a little more tired or anxious to move than I thought. And you're welcome to join us on these reflectors, your choice, whenever you like. 3 in the morning probably is not a good idea, but if your usual reflector is kind of not happening, and maybe you'd like to come over here and ask some questions, or maybe give a try to the XLX 212, feel free to do so. They're here for you to play with. You can't break them. And if you can, we're probably going to ask you how you did that, because that really shouldn't happen. And, see if you can catch us. There's usually someone around. Not all the time, but for heaven's sakes, we try to be there, and we love talking to D-Star, and would enjoy talking to all of you. So, I'm going to cut it right here and now, and move on. And there was something I was going to mention. I can't remember what it was. Well, part of it is that I want to wish all those that are going to be heading out to Dayton, I think it's next weekend, yeah. So you'll be heading out maybe this week. Have a good, safe trip. I hope you don't get into any of the predicaments that we've seen so far on the United, Delta, and Spirit Airlines. If you do, be sure to videotape it. Remember, put your camera in wide mode when you're doing your videotape. That is horizontal, not vertical. And if you're at Dayton, feel free to take a snapshot or scan or photograph in whatever manner anything that you think would be of interest to the roundtable. If you want to email it to me where you're at, I'll be happy to receive it in 6hkh@me.com. If you need to send a lot of files, I'll be happy to share a Dropbox with you. And if not, having that stuff sent over as part of a topic and suggestion and update, I love those things. And, what's happening at Dayton is just as important as, what's happening not at Dayton. Of course, that doesn't make any sense. So I got to get going. Thanks to all those that make this roundtable possible and support us. And we'll see you guys on D-Star. Everyone have a great weekend. N6HKH, good night.
Good night, Mrs. Calabash, wherever you are. Ha-cha-cha-cha-cha. Kaiser OJ.